Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday. Petrick Baby Watch is over. She's arrived, so we can finally return to our regularly scheduled CyHawk Talk. If you're wondering why there was no amazing show on Sunday, that's why I was still at the hospital helping her figure things out and figure out what life is like out on the outside. But we're super excited to be back. Ben maybe bringing a little bit more energy than me today, only going on limited sleep. So Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you right away. What are you looking at for the Cyclones as they're facing Kansas this weekend in the home finale for Iowa State?
It is the home finale. It's senior day. It's November in Jack Trice Stadium. Not what anybody drew up or pictured at the start of this season. This was not the home finale that you dreamed of, considering the way the Cyclones started this season 5-0. But there are some interesting storylines, Ethan, surrounding this game. And the main one that I've been asked about and heard about and wondered about is quarterback. Of course, you wonder about Rocco Becht and his injury status. He's not at a risk of not playing, from what we understand. But Matt Campbell did tell us this week, yeah, his injury, even though he gets an extra week of rest on the bye, it's not one that's just going to get better all of a sudden. So he's still dealing with some soreness. We see the left shoulder in a brace. He's had that the last couple games. Rocco Beck's not 100%. So the thing you watch is, well, what does that mean? Does it mean we see a little bit more Alex Manske? Does it see a little more Connor Moberly? Iowa State's two backup quarterbacks both have gotten in for select packages this season, mostly kind of in the running game. You wonder if Iowa State gets creative on a 2-point play or something of that nature to get one of those guys involved. You talk to different people about it. I'm not of the opinion Iowa State should give those guys a whole lot. For one, they've both had injuries. For two, I don't know if it necessarily elevates the offense in an entirely different level, either one of those two guys, even compared to a dinged up Rocco Becht. And three, I think it's so important to stand by Rocco Becht. These last two games, stand by him. You want a healthy Rocco Becht returning in 2026 because we saw what a healthy Rocco Becht did in 2025 at the start of this season. So in my opinion, you got to stand by Rocco Becht. And does that mean you can't get Manske or Moberly a couple snaps here and there? No. But I am interested to see what the snap breakdown looks like behind center.
Sometimes you'll have a situation in college football programs where the backup, the guy that goes in if you need to win a game and the starter gets hurt, is different than the guy who maybe is next up at quarterback. What's this like? Let's say Rocco is unable to play. He's out. He's going to miss the game with injury. They need to win. Do you have a sense as to who the number two quarterback would be in that situation as compared to maybe we just want to get both these guys developmental snaps?
That's a great question. I would maybe lean Connor Moberly, Ethan, because he was that guy last year. He played a little bit in the primary backup role. We didn't see as much of Manske, of course, because he was dealing with a torn UCL that happened his senior year of high school. So we haven't really gotten to see him except in some of these limited roles this season. So I don't know if there's kind of a designated backup. It really does feel like a 1A and a 1B behind
2A and
Rocco Beck.
2B. 2A and
Oh,
2B.
yeah. I guess a 2A and a 2B, because they are the number two quarterback. And so I don't know. Maybe that's still kind of up in the air. And maybe that's a reason why, Ethan. I'm talking myself out of my own point. Maybe if you do want to see what you got for next year and you want to get those guys some live reps, maybe you do throw them some snaps against Kansas or against Oklahoma State or certainly in the bowl game. So here I am. The longer I go on, the more I overthink it.
And then on the opposite side of the field, you're looking at something with Kansas's quarterback. What can you tell me about the situation with Jalon Daniels?
Jalon
The worst of
Daniels.
the two Jalon Daniels. Oh, I know it's
Yes.
Jaden Daniels for Washington, Jalon Daniels for Kansas. Never mind.
All good. All good.
That's the
I'm
baby
kind of
sleep
agreeing with you.
deprivation going on right there.
It's almost like you've been on limited sleep this week. Who could forgive you?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go
Uh,
on IR pretty soon here with a sleep deprivation designation.
yeah, you need load management for your rest. Listen, Jalon Daniels, I can't believe he's in his sixth year at quarterback. Iowa State fans have got to be so sick of this guy. Because he's done pretty well against Iowa State. He's 2-1. The Jayhawks have won their last three matchups in total against Iowa State. So I can't think that Matt Campbell and this Cyclone defense, John Haycock, are going to be too happy to see Jalon Daniels are going to be too sad to see him leave. So I think Iowa State could try and get the last laugh against Kansas's quarterback. And he looked great against Iowa State last year in that game in Arrowhead Stadium. That was just a decimation because of Iowa State's defensive injuries. I asked Matt Campbell this week if that tape from last year matters at all, because of all of the pieces and how they're much different this year around. And he said, yeah, it comes up a little bit, but I really don't think that there are a whole lot of, things you can evaluate because of all the injuries and stuff last year and the injuries this year. So we'll see. I just think it's a good opportunity for the Cyclones to kind of get one back on the guy who they're probably happy to see go.
And then every time you have a home regular season finale, home team honors the seniors. What's the senior class that's leaving Iowa State? What have they done? And will they be able to replace what they're losing?
Yeah, this is, of course, the senior class that, had a huge key in Iowa State's biggest, most successful season of all time, the 2024 season. And I think every senior day, you get some of those senior day scaries, right? You think, how in the world is this team going to replace all of these veteran leaders? Like, how, like, it can't happen. And then sure enough, every year it happens and you see guys step up into the leadership roles. And, this year I think of Dominique Orange and how central he has been to Iowa State's defense these last 2, 3 seasons. And there's not many guys that look like Dominic Orange that just walk through the door. So how are they going to replace him? How are you going to replace your tackle, Tyler Miller, the guy who's just been such a steady presence, a veteran leader on this team? How are you going to replace the punter, Tyler Perkins, who's had a phenomenal year quietly and has been a great holder for you? A lot of these seniors, how do you replace them? But we say that every year. So Iowa State's going to do that on its senior day. And last year they had a lot of guys to replace too. So maybe they're still working on that.
Well, I think if you're gonna point out that last year they had a lot of guys to replace too, I think you look at what this season's turned out to be and say maybe they never did replace Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins or Darian Porter. So I mean, I wouldn't be too comforted by that if I was a Cyclone fan, as I always like to take the negative perspective on everything Iowa State for whatever reason. But when I think about it's tough to replace a senior situation, the thing I usually think about is freak athletes like a Dom Orange. Those are usually the hardest guys to replace. Like, has
Yeah.
South Carolina ever replaced Jadeveon Clowney? Because that guy's just a freak, right? Has Wisconsin ever replaced a TJ Watt? Has Iowa ever had another Jack Campbell since he was at Iowa? No. And so I think that's the situation where you really need to be concerned about the production. But when it's a guy who is, fits in the system perfectly, you need to have trust in the coaching staff that they're going to be able to replace that guy because they know how to find they clearly know how to find that guy because they have him on your team right now. And so the next one is on their way up. You assume, you suspect. Do you feel like they have a guy behind Dom Orange, not necessarily that's going to be able to replace his freakish body, but that will be able to fill in admirably next year?
I'm so happy you brought that up because I thought Zaimir Hawk, Iowa State's backup nose tackle, played such a good game against TCU. I wrote it down. Ethan, he had, I think, a season high 3 tackles against the Horned Frogs, which, you think, oh, 3 tackles, but that means a lot for the centerpiece of Iowa State's 3-3-5 scheme, which just involves soaking up blockers. And I thought Zaimir Hawk played really well. He's done well in terms of Dom Orange's absence. So he's like 300 pounds instead of Dom Orange is 350 pounds. He's not as quite big of a citrus, but he's still a serviceable player. And I think somebody who you look to as, hey, that could be a serviceable replacement. Zaimir Hawk. That's definitely a name to watch and a guy to watch as Dom Orange, really has his sights, I think, set on the NFL. Of course, these next 3 games, but he talked about this week even just how I think excited he is for this next challenge. And I thought, man, selfishly, I can't wait to watch Dom Orange, go in a 5-man front. Maybe he gets drafted by a scheme that allows him to finally see a one-on-one matchup.
Mr. Hawk, not necessarily an orange, but he's no cutie, so he's going to be able to fill in perfectly fine. As we transition to look at Iowa's matchup in Kinnick Stadium against Michigan State, also senior day, also the regular season home finale. So it's kind of fun how those both lined up on the same day for the two in-state FBS programs. The number one thing I'm looking at is, does the 2024 Michigan State upset of Iowa Does that come into play at all? Do we see a more motivated Iowa than we maybe would have for a non-rival type Big Ten team? Yes, these teams have history because they were both in that original 10 Big Ten teams, or they've both been in the Big Ten for a long time, but not necessarily like heated rivals, especially once things went east west. They didn't see each other for a couple of years there, so it's certainly not two fan bases that hate each other. But as we saw last week between Iowa and USC, and the week before that between Iowa and Oregon fans on social media, you can build a rivalry in 4 days. You can build a rivalry in 3 days with just some of the vitriol that the burners will throw back and forth. That you just gotta put on a hazmat suit before you go scroll Twitter looking for the fans throwing heaters back and forth. So I'll be curious to see, because last year Michigan State kind of killed Iowa's college football playoff dreams. They didn't have necessarily the resume to make it, but going into East Lansing, you're thinking like, man, we got a puncher's chance if we go 10-2, right? And then they lose to the Spartans, and it's like, okay, the resume already stunk, and now you lost to a pretty miserable Michigan State team. It's over, and you kind of saw the season unravel at that point. It wasn't long after that Jamari Harris ended up out for the rest of the season. Cade McNamara out for the rest of the season, and it just kind of, they finished 8-5, 8-4 in the regular season. So you wouldn't say that was a bad season, but it certainly wasn't the season everyone expected. And I really kind of pin that on the poor performance in East Lansing, and that kind of being the point where there was no return. Like they passed the event horizon on making the playoffs, and they got sucked into the bowl void, or whatever you want to call it, where you're just playing in this meaningless bowl game in Nashville on 2 days before New Year's Eve, and it doesn't mean anything, and you thought you were going to make the college football playoff. So I think that they should be motivated because of that. I asked Ethan Hurkett yesterday if there was any extra motivation, and he said no. I don't think I've ever got Ethan Hurkett to say anything that isn't like straight out of the coach speak index, but I'll be curious to see if you can tell in their play that they're more motivated.
The coach speak index. I love that. I hate that. I hate the coach speak index. You mentioned the college football playoff hopes. Michigan State kind of ended them last year. This year, they're already ended heading into this game. What's your take on how that's going to impact Iowa?
Yeah, kind of coming out of what I was talking about is I feel like you have two warring motivations. It's like the lack of motivation from losing your college football playoff dreams that were already pretty slim going into last week, and now they're officially gone. They're not in the ranking anymore. You're not going to jump, you know, 25 spots to get into the top 12 by the end of the season to make a college football playoff berth at this point, especially unless you're playing Ohio State and Indiana and knock both of them off the final 2 weeks. Then the college football playoff committee would have to think pretty hard. But Iowa's not making it now, and I'm curious to see how that affects them, because I do feel like we saw a slightly different Iowa team after the college football playoff dreams got murdered in East Lansing last year. Not to question their effort or their energy or whatever. It just seemed like maybe it was like they knew they weren't playing for that ultimate prize anymore, and that stung a little bit. And maybe the 24-hour rule wasn't able to wash away all that hurt, in 24 hours. And then you have the motivation of these guys killed our dreams last year. Let's go, let's go hand them their eighth straight loss in Big Ten play. So I think that'll be interesting to see what motivation wins out. So maybe I should have talked about it with my last point that I was looking at, but it's kind of like a war going on. It's like which wolf inside, to go full middle school emo kid, which wolf inside of Iowa is going to win out?
Nice. Okay. The other thing that
Nice,
I
nice.
mean, motivation can only go so far, and injuries, have a lot of time, a lot more to do with the result of a game and the outcome rather than the inner wolf. Ethan, what's the injury update on the Hawks?
Yeah, while I was in the hospital trying to catch every second of the USC game on the tiny hospital TV, a couple of Hawkeyes got injured. TJ Hall ends up in a sling after the game, and then three offensive linemen, Jennings Ducker, Bo Stevens, and Cade Peeper, all end up exiting the game at different points. And so you've lost three of your top 10 offensive players according to Pro Football Focus grades. You lost your number two defensive starter according to Pro Football Focus grades. And it's like, well, those are some pretty critical losses, especially when you look at the fact that the offensive line is been routinely the best unit that Iowa has put on the field this year. And all five starters are in that top 10 grouping on Pro Football Focus in terms of grades. They're in the Joe Moore Award watch or semifinalist list for a reason, which means they're one of the 10 best offensive lines in the country this year. And now you're down three starters before the final two games of the season. I mean, I think that Iowa felt like they had upwards of 8, 9 starters on the roster for offensive linemen this year, and I think they feel comfortable with the three guys that could replace the three that are hurt. It's just going to be interesting to see if those guys are able to play and whether or not they play it safe. What's going to go on there? Kirk Ferentz said he was optimistic about all three playing, but then later kind of walked that back and said, I'm not overly optimistic about any of our injured players. So I would say it's like 60-40, all three play. I wouldn't be surprised to see two of them play and one of them miss. And I have no inside information to tell you which one's going to miss. I just don't think. I think if you're betting on all three, you're going to lose that bet. I think it's going to be at least one guy misses. And then TJ Hall, he's probably not going to play. And what I find most interesting about this is, yeah, it sucks to not have your starting cornerback, but I'll be curious to see how they replace him because Zach Lutmer's gotten some playing time at cornerback. Deshaun Lee, they feel comfortable with him, but he's not TJ Hall. So I want to see how they work the secondary and change that rotation because it's going to tell you a little bit about what it's going to look like potentially next year. And so that'll be like the thing you want to watch the most if TJ Hall misses, which sounds likely according to what Kirk Ferentz said on Tuesday, though he did qualify the fact that he was in a sling by saying, we give everyone a sling and a boot. As long as they're hurt, they're getting the sling or the boot. So don't read into that. It doesn't mean it's a bad injury. It just means they're hurt. So don't freak out about the sling, but he's probably not going to play.
I remember earlier this season, Jada Williams, Iowa State women's basketball point guard, was spotted in a boot. And yes, like definitely precautionary, I suppose, when your star athlete gets hurt and anything. Hey, throw a boot on there. Walk around with the class. I've heard a story of a college football player not at either Iowa or Iowa State who was instructed, hey, when you're walking around class, you can't have your boot on, but the second you get in the team facility, put your boot on. Sometimes there's some optics and some gamesmanship involved with all of that too.
Well, I could understand wanting them to wear the sling or the boot so they don't exacerbate. Like if it's a minor injury, it's like, oh, you're maybe gonna miss one game and come back. But if we don't put you in the sling, you might get hurt worse and miss the rest of the season. Like, would you really want to turn a badly sprained ankle into a broken ankle because you just didn't want them to wear the boot because you didn't want people on social media to freak out that they'd broken their ankle, right? So I totally get where Ferentz is coming from. I just thought that would also be a super convenient explanation to downplay a more serious injury as well. So I think there's that side of it as well, that if you're a skeptical fan, you might be like, he's blowing smoke up your butt. But I tend to just think that he's playing us fairly straight, and so I think TJ Hall's probably going to miss the Michigan State game, play in the Nebraska game. That'll do it for our storylines that we're watching, but be sure to tune right back in right after this for our Sunday's headlines today.
Really special play? Do you guys have a special name for that? And what was your reaction when that was called?
I was pumped when it got called. I was looking forward to it. We had it in for the past, couple of weeks. We name a lot of our trick plays after bars in town. So this one was named after Stella, right across the street. So I don't know. I think it's always usually something pretty fun whenever that ends up happening because it's always some sort of trick play. And, we always work on it in practice. You never know if it's actually going to get called in the game, and it's always super exciting because then you also get a receiver that throws a passing touchdown or a running back that throws a passing touchdown. So everyone's always usually having fun, and that's what makes football fun.
Welcome back to CyHawk Talk, talking Sunday's headlines today for Iowa State's matchup against Kansas and Iowa's matchup against Michigan State. Ben, why don't you go ahead and tell us what your predictions are for the Cyclones?
My first headline is Cyclone Grounds Hawks. I know it's probably a pun you've seen made before, but in my estimation, these will be the second Hawks that Iowa State has grounded this season because the Jayhawks are going down, guys. It's 3 in a row for Kansas. Jalon Daniels, this team feels like kind of has Iowa State's number. But the Jayhawks are not playing good football right now. You think Iowa State's playing bad football right now? The Jayhawks are right there with them. They got absolutely destroyed in the Sunflower Showdown against K-State, beat Oklahoma State not super impressively, and then had a game at Arizona. That was not super impressive at all. So the Jayhawks aren't necessarily playing their best football, which is why this game is at 11 a.m. I think, Ethan. Something about it. Somebody has to win. In my estimation, Iowa State gets it done. And oddly enough, success is still in sight. If Iowa State wins this week, Ethan, they're probably going to beat Oklahoma State the following weekend. And then that means a bowl game could potentially be Iowa State's ninth win of the season, which sounds incredible considering how down it felt like the narrative around this team is. And Iowa State will be going for its second consecutive 9-win season, which has never happened before. Iowa State's never won 9 games in a season in back-to-back years. So success, maybe not off of what we thought at the start of the season, but there's going to be some modicum of success available for the Cyclones if they can get this Kansas win. I think everything's still on the table for them. And my last headline, I don't know what editor would approve this, but it's by Perry Ellis 2.0. I've heard multiple Perry Ellis comparisons to Jalon Daniels, a Kansas Jayhawk who's been there forever, who nobody is excited to see, just sick of the guy. I think Iowa State sends Jalon Daniels, the sixth-year quarterback, out with a loss. So bye, Perry Ellis 2.0.
Yeah, I totally love that reference because I've seen some TikToks going around where it's like the Perry Ellis Award and it goes out to the oldest guy in men's college basketball. And because all there's still COVID guys hanging around, there's some pretty old dudes playing college basketball this year. And then as a fan, I just feel like every year you'll play that team that's always on your schedule, and a guy will make a play, and the announcer will say his name. You're like, that guy's still in college. For me, right as I was getting into journalism and I was at the University of Nebraska, that guy was Patty Fisher for Northwestern. Every time the Huskers played the Wildcats, I was like, man, that guy's still in college. I think I probably said that his sophomore year because it just felt like he was there eternally. Close second, Devin Mockabee, running back for Purdue. It feels like that dude has been in college for 7 years, and he's a true senior this year. So he's only been in college for 4 years. Feels like an eternity to me. Going into my headlines, I have number one, Sparty swarmed. I think that Iowa's going to be kind of all over the place. I was talking about those two warring motivations, and I think you're going to see a highly motivated Iowa team. Ethan Herkett might tell me there's no extra motivation, from revenge for last year, but I think we might see a little bit of something that might look like that on Saturday, and see a highly motivated Hawkeye team despite losing their college football playoff aspirations officially last weekend. Number two, crisp and clean. First week in a row where there's not a heavy amount of rain in the forecast where I was playing. So I think you're going to see a crisp, clean game. Maybe a little bit sloppy, a little bit of that more hard-nosed, grinded out football that you've seen the last 2 weeks. I think this week it's going to look a little bit more buttoned up. Probably not going to get the freak interception from Mark Gronowski that bounces off a defensive lineman's head or bounces off a defensive back's head into a defensive lineman's hands. So you're probably not gonna see anything freak like that. Maybe Caden Weegen's gonna be able to get his feet down more obviously for the officials as opposed to the one where he was definitely in, but they still called it out. And then to wrap it up, back in the black. Obviously, everyone knows that Iowa walks out to back in black, but this is back in the black because they're back in the win column. They're going positive again. They've been 2 straight losses. It's very rare for them to lose multiple games in the month of November. And so the fact that they've lost 2 already it's pretty incredible. And I think just, looking at a trend, you'll say, yeah, probably not going to keep losing in November. So that'll do it for my Sunday's headlines today. Before we get out of here, Ben, circling back to your final headline, I want to know, if you go 3-0 to finish the season, wins over Kansas, wins over Oklahoma State, and a win in the bowl game, does that absolve how disappointing the season's been for the Cyclones?
No, it doesn't. I don't think it does, Ethan, because the expectation, the bar got raised after the 5-0 start, after going on to a different continent and beating your rival, beating Iowa. The expectation got raised with all the returning talent, with the quarterback, with everything that it had. Iowa State had college football playoff, aspirations, and I think the expectations got changed. So relative to Iowa State's history as a college football program, yes, 2025, a 9-win campaign could be remembered as successful, but not compared to what we know Iowa State had going after the 5-0 start.
It's always interesting how those little scheduling quirks work out because I feel like if you spread out those 4 losses so that they're not back to back to back to back, it probably feels a little bit better finishing the season 9-4. But when you go on a 4-game losing streak, it feels like you went 0-12 for those 4 weeks.
That's a great point. I mean, Iowa State needed that win. Like the TCU win to carry them into the bye. You could just tell there's a different kind of levity around the team after 4 weeks of just the same. So yes, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. We'll have to maybe look back at that in our final football CyHawk talk. It's sort of a reflection on, where it went wrong or what went wrong. But interesting point you bring up.
As long as we look back at that point only because it was very sharp and not my bold predictions, I'm good with that for our football rewind show coming in 2 weeks' time. But that'll do it for our Wednesday show. Thanks for watching. We'll be back on Sunday with a recap of the Kansas potential win and the Michigan State potential win. Let's be positive to end the show. Thanks for watching. We'll be back.